Hi, everybody. I'm Congresswoman Lauren Underwood, and I have the honor of representing the 14th District of Illinois. Thank you for joining me during National Small Business Week for this workshop on the SBA Veteran, Woman, and Minority-Owned Small Business Certifications. I am so thrilled that Bo Steiner, District Director for the U.S. Small Business Administration's Illinois District Office, and Rosalind Putman, the SBA's Supervisory Business Opportunity Specialist, have agreed to join us for today's event. I know that they are going to share some very valuable information, and we will have them introduce themselves in just a minute. My focus in Congress has been helping our community recover from the pandemic by creating jobs and getting people back to work, lowering costs for you and your family, and delivering millions in federal funding for essential projects across our district, like rebuilding infrastructure. Now we see our economy is not only recovering, but it's growing. Here in Illinois, our unemployment rates are below 5% for the first time since March of 2020. But despite the success we've had, we know that many of our small businesses were hit hard in the pandemic and may still be struggling. And I understand that small businesses are vital to the health of our economy and to our community. When small businesses in our community needed help paying their employees during the toughest part of the pandemic, I supported the legislation that brought in over $1.8 billion of forgivable Paycheck Protection Program, or PPP loans, to small businesses throughout the 14th District, ensuring that business owners could pay their employees and stay in business. We all know that many restaurants were hit hard during the first year of the pandemic, and that's why I fought to bring $38 million in Restaurant Revitalization Fund grants to over 200 restaurants in our community. However, due to the Restaurant Revitalization Fund's popularity and the high level of need, its funding was exhausted before more than 170,000 eligible businesses could access relief. So last month, the House of Representatives passed legislation to replenish funding for the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, as well as establish a new hard-hit industries award program to deliver assistance to small businesses that suffered the greatest revenue losses due to the pandemic. Now, we're counting on the Senate to take action so that this relief can reach the restaurants and small businesses working so hard to rebuild. And now that our economy is growing at record speed, I'm focused on making sure that this growth remains strong in the long term and that the SBA continues to provide resources for businesses in our community to thrive. This is why I am so pleased to have these two great SBA representatives here to talk about veteran, minority, and women-owned business certifications. In their presentation, they will discuss the benefits of receiving these certifications and, more importantly, how you can receive them. They will then answer some of your questions, and they were submitted by folks like you to our office. If you have any questions, my team can assist. And not just for issues related to SBA certifications, my office has experience in cutting through the red tape of all federal agencies. We help with issues like Medicare benefits, military benefits, Social Security issues, and more. We are here to work for you and to be a resource. So please call us anytime, 630-549-2190, or you can visit us online at underwood.house.gov if you or anyone you know who lives in our congressional district and is having a problem with a federal agency and needs help. Now, I am so pleased to turn it over to Frank Olson, who is the Veterans Outreach Representative based in my district office. Frank is going to introduce our speakers, and then we'll moderate the rest of the discussion this morning. Over to you, Frank.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman. So it's my pleasure to introduce today's speakers from the SBA Illinois District Office. Please welcome Bo Steiner, who's the District Director, and Rosalind Putman, who's the Supervisory Business Opportunity Specialist. Bo and Rosalind, thanks so much for joining us this morning. Would you like to introduce yourselves briefly before starting the presentation?
Sure, Frank. Thank you for having us today. Really appreciate the opportunity to support small businesses, and thanks to Congresswoman Underwood for having us here today. Bo Steiner, I'm the district director for the Illinois district office at the SBA, and I'm also a Navy veteran. So I love that we're talking about veteran certification and how we can help the veteran community. We are really focused on helping small businesses access the federal marketplace as a way to diversify your business and provide opportunities for the federal government to benefit from the innovation and the flexibility that small businesses bring to our contracting community. So really excited to talk about the various certifications that we have, how they can benefit your business, as well as how to start navigating the federal contracting space and some of the things you need to think about even before getting into that market. So really excited to talk about this today and answer more questions. I'd like to introduce my colleague, Rosalind Putman. She's the subject matter expert. She's going to make sure that as we go through this, I don't say anything that's wrong because she knows every ins and outs of federal contracting, and we'll be able to make sure that we can answer all of your questions to the best of our ability. So Roz, why don't you go ahead and take a moment to introduce yourself.
Good morning, everyone. My boss loves to put that pressure on me. Good morning. My name is Rosalind Putman. Thank you again for the invite. I serve as a supervisory business opportunity specialist, and I'm responsible for managing and administering the federal certification programs for the U.S. Small Business Illinois District Office. And those certification programs are the 8A Business Development Program, our Hub Zone Certification Program, our Women-Owned Small Business Certification Program, and our Veteran Certification Program. So those are the certification programs, and today we're going to talk a little bit about them. And as Robert said, we're going to talk about just learning how to do business with the government, how to navigate through the federal market. I'm excited today to be here to share my knowledge on these certification programs. Thank you.
Great, thank you both so much. And with that, we'll get started with your presentation.
Great, thank you, Frank. So as we talk about getting into the federal contracting space, the first step that we want everybody to take is to determine, hey, am I even eligible to participate? Am I a small business? And there are a number of different ways that you can make that assessment. Number one is the size standards. That's always can be a limiter for businesses. Often people think, oh, 500 employees is kind of the benchmark for determining whether I'm large or small. Now, SBA does use that for some of our data collection, but when it comes to specific businesses and their size as it relates to federal contracting space, it depends on the industry. And we base it on the North American Industry Code System, what we call shorthand is NAICS code. And what that does is establishes a dollar amount that is the threshold, a revenue dollar amount that's the threshold that determines whether you're a small business or not. And typically, size standards are determined over a period of years, and Rosalind can talk a little bit more to that, but as in, it's the average of 5 years of your business revenues is what we look at from a size standard perspective. But it's the first thing that you want to look at is, what is my NAICS code? Often you'll see it when you file your tax returns. You will include a NAICS code in those tax returns, so you can see what you're currently categorized at as an NAICS. You want to look at your business type. Really, any type of business formation can typically take advantage of the federal contracting space. So that shouldn't be an inhibitor as you move forward. And you're going to want to be operating primarily within the U.S. So that is a consideration. Again, I mentioned the size restrictions. That's based on your NAICS code. Generally speaking, it's a revenue-based determination. However, there are certain businesses like wholesale, warehousing, manufacturing that may be employee-based as opposed to revenue-based. You may be non-qualified if your primary operations are outside of the U.S. And nonprofit businesses are typically not considered for federal contracts. So things to consider as you look at your eligibility to participate as a federal contractor. Now, you're gonna, as I mentioned, you're gonna wanna really hone in on what your NAICS code is and the size standards for your particular industry. As you look at the revenue by industry, you'll see that it really varies depending on an industry. You may be a general contractor where the max revenue is $35 million a year. You may be in a professional services space where it's only $7.5 million a year. So you're going to want to really look at that and see how you fit in. And again, if you have questions about it, it's based on your primary business line. And you can usually talk to one of your trusted advisors, like your accountant or your attorney, determine which would be best for your business and which lines up most with the business that you do. You can find a whole list of NAICS codes at the Census Bureau website, and it'll help you identify that. There's a lot of different websites that have the NAICS codes laid out, but Census is the official place to go. And then, you're going to want to look at your business readiness, and that involves a lot of different things. Number one, does the government buy what you sell? You really want to make sure and do some research to determine, hey, does the federal government buy X, Y, or Z? Now, we know that the federal government is the biggest buyer of goods and services in the world. I think there's usually up to around $500 billion in spend on goods and services annually. So in all likelihood, somebody in the government buys what you sell, but you're going to want to make sure that that's the case. Second piece, you're going to have to really be organized doing business with the government. There's a lot of expectations around reporting, delivery, billing, all of the administrative type of activities that you need to do to interact with the federal government. You're also going to want to make sure that you've got the financial capacity to be able to support that contract. So that means having either the cash flow already in order to support taking on a government contract, or have access to capital through loans, working lines of capital, those sorts of things, to be able to fulfill the government need. You're also going to want to have access to that human capital. So are you capable of fulfilling a government contract with the expertise and the workforce that you need to do so, or at least can you access that workforce? And then finally, do you know where to find the contracting opportunities? Now, that's something that there's a lot of resources out there to assist you, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, but just know that this is kind of that first step where you can actually see, okay, where can I get help to move forward? I'll hand it over to Roz as we get into the government buying goods and services.
Okay, thank you, Robert. So we're going to talk about how the government buys in terms of contracts. So as Robert mentioned, the government is the largest buyer of goods and services. The government spends over $500 billion a year on buying. And the government buys everything from paperclip to army tanks. So in there between all of that, a small business sells some of that. So the government buys everything. There's a 23% federal contracting dollars that must be spent with small businesses. And that's going to fall under our small business set aside. But the very first type of contract is full and open competition. And that's where those contracts are open to everyone, small or large businesses. The government is just not exclusively for small businesses, but it's for everyone, large and small. So that's going to be your full and open competition where everyone can compete for a specific contract based upon a NAICS code. So that's how the government identifies your industry and how they set aside their contracts under respective NAICS codes. And then we call number 2 is our small business set-asides. So that's going to be our set-aside programs, which is our 8A program, which falls under small disadvantaged business. Then that's going to be our women-owned small business contracting program. That's going to be our hub zone, as well as our veteran service veteran. Wait a minute. All right, so serves the veterans. Damn, I'm getting tired. Our veterans, our service disabled veteran-owned small businesses. Sorry about that. And then there's a sole source component to our contracting. Under our 8A program, there are contracts that are set aside on a sole source basis for the 8A participants as well as for HubZone. Now, women-owned, it's sole source, but it at least still has to be at least 2 firms of women companies that can provide that product or service. Next slide, please, Robert. So actually, I kind of went into the competition in terms of the types of contract. And as I said, we're full and open. That's a full playing field. That's an open playing field for everyone. And you have to be responsible on all and any government contracts. And then we talk about our set-asides. That's the rule of 2, where at least 2 companies can provide that service, the competition between at least 2, with subcontracting limitations, which means that the firms, that the companies have to subcontract. There's a certain amount that they have to subcontract it, and they have to provide that particular plan when you're subcontracting on that contract. We talked about, I mentioned a little bit how sole source works. So that's really when there's one firm that can provide that product or service that the agency chooses when they're looking at a small business. And I kind of mentioned the programs where they fall under. It's pretty much for our 8A certification program. It would be our women-owned small business program and HubZone as well. I think I left out HubZone before, but HubZone does have a sole source component too. And with the HubZone, that means no one else can provide that particular product or service. And that's when they would actually go the sole source route for a HubZone opportunity.
Rosalind, if I could just add a couple of thoughts.
Sure.
On the full and open, that's where you'll see it could be anywhere from, Lockheed Martin to a small business in Plainfield that might be trying to secure that contract. So that gives you kind of the range of different types of businesses that may compete in those full and open. Also wanted to touch on the set aside, and something that I think is super important when Rosalind mentions the rule of 2. Basically, when you think about the way the government works is each agency puts together a procurement plan that has to include strategies around set-asides in order to meet their small business deliverables. And we'll talk about what the specifics are for each type of set-aside group. But what often contracting officers will do if they don't already have a pool of businesses in that particular NAICS code is they will put out what's it called, Rosalind? It's
sources sought.
Sources sought.
Well, that's their marketing tool that they're looking when they're doing a search for small businesses and in respective programs, set aside programs. Yes.
So one of the things that's super important is if you see a sources sought that's in your NAICS code, it lines up with what you do and it fits your type of business or certification. You want to make sure you respond to those, because if they don't receive responses through that sources sought, they may not be able to set aside that procurement to that particular certification or that particular group, and may have to switch it to something else. So just remember that they're looking for potential candidates as part of that process, and it behooves you to respond if it's appropriate, just to make sure that they stay in that set aside stays as it is. And I think on the subcontracting piece too, it's really important to note that typically for set asides, the business, the certified business that's the principal on those contracts, they've got to do some percentage of the work compared to, and Rosalind will correct me, but some percentage of the work, a minimum percentage in order for it to qualify. So it can't be just one person who then, hires a subcontractor to do 99% of the work. That typically would not be acceptable as part of the program. And there are specifics that I'm sure Rosalind could share, but just be aware that there are those limitations and you need to be aware of them as you're going through the procurement process.
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up, Robert. For example, with that subcontracted, so if it's a service contract, the small business or that set aside company has to do at least 50%, and then they could subcontract out the other 50%. If it's construction, at least 15% has to be done by whatever set aside group that the agency is using for that particular contract. So yes, so that is very important. So it's not just like he used the example of the 99% and 1%. So there is a percentage that ties to that, and that is mentioned in our size regulation, CFR Part 121. That's in size. There's a section in there on subcontracting. Okay, next slide. Okay, so now Robert mentioned about the I did mention earlier about what the requirements are, that 23% that the government has to spend with small businesses, and these are the percentages that are before you. On women-owned small business set-asides, at least they have to buy at least 5%. And whether you want to believe it or not, sometimes it's hard for them to achieve these goals. The small disadvantaged business, which the 8A falls under that, at least 5%. Hub zone is 3%, and service disabled veteran-owned small business, at least 3%. So the government has to spend with the small businesses through these respective agencies. These percentages, these are the set-aside goals, and we do monitor that. SBA has a whole team that monitors this, and nobody wants to get a bad rating. So the agencies do work hard at trying to obtain this. The one thing about the 8A program, they can come direct. The agencies can come directly to SBA. So this is kind of an advantage for them as well as our 8A participants, because the agencies again can come directly to us if they're looking for a specific firm or in a specific industry. Now, their set-asides also reserved for small businesses that we call micro purchase thresholds, and that's up to $3,500. And you can use your government purchase cards for that. And then and that threshold goes up to $250,000, which is called the simplified acquisition threshold, where the agencies can actually come directly to the small businesses in terms of contracting with them directly without going through even us, for that matter, on contracts. Okay, so that's how the set-aside portion works. I don't know if you wanted to touch a little bit more on that, Robert, or?
I think the takeaway is just, I think the numbers are important, but the reality is takeaway should be that the federal government's committed to getting contracts to small businesses, federal contracts to small businesses. In fact, for the small disadvantaged business goal, that is for this year, it's actually 11%. It's been increased, and the goal is to eventually get it to 15%. So just know that there's a commitment there. And again, we'll talk about the resources that are out there to help you navigate all these various programs and the set-asides and so forth.
Okay. Was that me or?
I'll take it.
Okay.
So a couple things as you look at researching your marketplace. There's a lot of different resources and avenues where you can go. I think the first thing you want to see is, you obviously need to understand what your NAICS code is and what kind of products you deliver. You can look up spending. There's a lot of different websites. usaspending.gov is one place, but there's a lot of different sources where you can find out who's buying what you're selling, okay? And be able to identify that. One of the resources we're going to talk about in a minute is the Procurement Technical Assistance Center. They are funded by the Department of Defense, and they provide one-on-one business counseling and assistance in the area of government contracting. So as you think about how to identify and do market research on what's happening, they can also be tremendous resources in helping you to focus your efforts through specific tools and they also likely have experience and can kind of point you in the right direction right off the bat. Second piece here is, just like in the private sector market, competition is fierce. So you have to understand what your value add is to that particular contractor. Now, the way federal government procurement is done is typically it is, there's a term, and it's kind of a term of art, but when a contracting officer is making a decision, it's technically acceptable, and then it's based on all those that are technically acceptable, meaning they meet all of the requirements of that particular request for proposal, then they go with the lowest price bidder. So again, you want to keep that in mind. You need to be really cautious and smart about your pricing strategies as you go into this, because you don't want to underbid either, because then you'll be in a difficult situation when you go to actually deliver on that contract. Last thing I would say on the find your niche is contracting officers are heavily burdened in the federal government. They have a lot of work to do, and they're always looking for contractors. They don't want to have a lot of problems, right? So the more that you can, help them solve their problems and be responsible in delivering, they're going to really appreciate that. As we mentioned, you need to understand the areas of government spending, know your competition to their contracts. These are all ways that you can do the market research that you need to do to understand where you want to bid and where you want to spend your time. One other part of this is, as you research your market, is just like in the private sector, you're going to still, just because you respond to a request for a proposal isn't necessarily going to get you there. You need to build relationships within the federal contracting workspace through the Office of Small Disadvantaged Business that each agency has, through contracting officers, through events that RAS and other organizations hold to provide access to contracting officers. You want to take advantage of that so that people can start to get to know your business and start to build that level of trust in your organization.
Robert, I just wanted to touch on, if you wouldn't mind just going back to that last slide, know what agencies buy your product and services. Now, a lot of times when small businesses are trying to break into the federal market, they say they want to do business with everybody, but not everybody is buying your product or service. So you want to go to the resource place where you can see where they're buying. So the government buys if you go to the database, beta.sam.gov, which replaced federalbusinessopportunities.gov, this is where all federal procurement over 25,000 is listed. So you will be able to, from that website, you'll be able to see what your respective NAICS codes, who's buying what. And then there are individuals on those websites with their information. It's very hard to kind of get to a contracting officer. We have, which we're going to talk about that on the next slides. We have kind of intermediaries between the contracting officer and the small business. And so those individuals would be your lead way in to the government, if you will. But you want to do your research. As Robert said, you want to do your research. You want to see who's buying, which agency. And you can't do business with everybody. It's just impossible. So you want to streamline to the respective agencies that you want to do business with. Finding your niche, what's special about you? What's different about you? This is what your niche is. What makes you who you are? And you want to, as Robert said, the competition is fierce, but something should stand out about you. And this is what you have to convey to the buying activity. How the government buys. The government buys in quarters. The government has forecasts, contract forecasts, what they're going to buy in respective quarters. We have 4 quarters. So right now, I believe we're in our 3rd quarter. I think we're in our 3rd quarter, right? Yeah, we're in our 3rd quarter. And so the government buys in quarters. And like I said, they have forecasts. So you can kind of go to the respective agencies' website and see and look at their forecasts and kind of see what they're buying and when they're buying. So that is very key and important too in how the government, how they spend their money. So that's key. And again, like Robert said, competition is really fierce. So you want to make sure that that you can actually, if you get a contract, you win a contract and you deliver on that contract. Okay, so that's very important. So we're going to talk about understanding your customers. Let's go back to who are the influencers. Those are your program managers. Those are your high-level decision makers. Who are your small business specialists? Those are the people, I said, the intermediaries between you and the contracting officer. Those are your small business managers, small business liaison people. And then you have your SBA point of contact. That would be me, a business opportunity specialist. That would, SBA also has PCRs, and we also have CMRs. So our PCRs, Procurement Center Representative, they are assigned to work with respective agencies, and they're responsible to ensure that these agencies are spending with small businesses. They kind of work as a liaison too between the small business and the agency. Then we also have our CMR. Those are commercial marketing representatives. They're responsible to making sure as well that small businesses are getting opportunities with agencies as well. And then we have our buyers. Who are the buyers? The contracting officers. Those are the buyers. And the end user is the person or company that uses the product or service that you're providing. So that's understanding your customers. And I think Robert's going to talk about our procurement assistance resources.
Yep. So lots of awesome resources out there to help you with this because there is that commitment. First off, you do have your SBA resources. Usually the first point of entry is with the business opportunity specialist. That's the role Rosalind holds. There's also the Procurement Technical Assistance Centers, which I mentioned earlier, who are great resources from the standpoint of contracting assistance in Illinois. The Illinois Small Business Development Center, which is part of the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity, runs the PTAC. And they are run in partnership with the Small Business Development Center, which is focused on helping businesses as they grow, start, expand, et cetera. Both are great resources, both are no-cost resources. So highly encourage you, if you're exploring the federal space, to take advantage of all of those to help you. A lot of marketing resources. I'm not going to go through all of these. Rosalind mentioned FedBizOps, Federal Procurement Data Systems, lots of information there. I would encourage you to just visit each one and take a look at what they all have to offer, and then the other resources as we've mentioned below. So lots of tools out there that shouldn't cost you anything, and ways for you to get the information that you need. We also always like to mention that sometimes the best way into federal contracting is by being a subcontractor. It helps you get some experience in understanding how the federal landscape works, how the administrative side of things work, and also gives you an opportunity to build additional capacity to support eventually becoming a prime contractor. You can work with a prime. There's lots of different ways to navigate that through teaming agreements, joint ventures, or mentor proteges. Again, good way to build that capacity. You can also team with other small businesses to come together to build capacity. And sometimes that will allow you to compete for set-asides that if you're working with a large or an other than small prime, you might not be able to access. And then, all this is going to help you gain experience, expand your opportunities. So a lot of times we'll see businesses start in maybe with the state or local or, private sector contracting, and then they move eventually into the federal space through contracting, and then up to the prime contracting, or serving as a prime contractor. Want to touch real quick on SAM, the System for Award Management. This is where you will register your entity. Any business that wants to do business with the federal government has to register in SAM. It's how we verify the existence of your business, more or less, and also how you get paid. You put all your bank information, and that's how payment is made with the federal government. So, we really want you to push you through this, or push you in this direction. One of the, I didn't mention earlier, but one of the benefits of doing business with the federal government is that payment. So federal government is required to pay subcontractors within 30 days of receiving a correct and valid invoice. So you can expect to get paid typically much faster than that with the federal government, whereas with sometimes other types of business operations, you'll be net 60, net 90 terms. With the SBA, it's net 30, basically. And then each day beyond that 30-day period of payment, SBA has to pay interest, or the federal government has to pay interest. So just know that you do get paid quickly through the federal government. When you register in SAM, it also is helpful because then, you can be searched, your business can be searched, and it's just a good opportunity where, people can find you as well. Now, one thing I would note, there's a lot of websites that look like the SAM website that are not, where they're going to charge you to get registered in SAM. Registration in SAM, securing your unique entity identifier number, all of that is free. Doesn't cost you a thing, and it shouldn't cost you a thing. So as you go through the SAM registration process, which again is required, you just want to make sure that that you can do it at no cost. All right, Rosalind, we're gonna get into certifications now, and I know we're gonna hit the high points on these so that we can make sure we can get to your questions. So Rosalind, if you want to go ahead and hit on the 8A.
Okay.
program.
Yes, the 8A program is a business development program. It assists firms in assessing business development support through we have a 7J training program, as well as direct business development support with your BOS. Then this program helps you build capacity and grow through our contracting program. We have in the contracting program, we have two components: sole source component, where we talked about that, where you can be sole source to contract up to $4.5 million directly, and then anything over that would be competed, which would be on www.beta.sam.gov. That's where the opportunity would be listed, and then and that's up on the service and construction, and on the manufacturing, then that's 7.5 million. You can be sole source, and everything else would be competitive. It is a one-time 9-year program. It's a once in a lifetime, one-time 9-year program. So our program is divided into two components. We say the development stage and the transitional stage. So what SBA does is we want to ensure that our firms have a balance when it comes to managing their revenues. So we say under the first 4 years, you can. I don't like to use this word, but if you're lucky enough to get constant opportunities in that program, during that time in the development stage, you can just strictly go sole source. But in that transitional stage, we want you to start having a balance in your 5th year, and we want at least 15% of your revenues to be generated from non-8A contracts up to 50% when you graduate out of the program, which would be your 9th year. And that way, when you leave the program, you don't have, you won't have those 8A contracts available. So we want you to have a balance to be able to make it after you leave the 8A program, because some people come to the program and they get contracts and the agencies like them and they continue to work with them. But we need you to have that balance so that you'll be able to make it afterwards. Robert, I don't know if you want to say something on this or not.
No, I mean, I think it's just long-term sustainability of the business. We want to use the program to build your capacity and experience, but then be able to serve you well in the long term and not be solely reliant on 8A contracts.
Correct. So these are kind of just, we've kind of put our eligibility requirements kind of in this diagram here. The first question you have to ask yourself, is 8A certification appropriate for you? We ask that you be in business for at least 2 years. And one of the requirements is you have to be socially and economically disadvantaged. If you fall under a certain group, then that's considered to be, you'll be considered as socially disadvantaged. And that's a certain ethnic group if you fall under one of those groups. And if you don't, you have to prove a case of social disadvantage, and then economically disadvantaged. That's if you don't have access to capital and credit readily available to you. So those components go together, as well as the net worth criteria under that economic disadvantage. Your personal net worth cannot exceed $750,000 coming into the program, and it cannot exceed that while you're in the program, because otherwise you're no longer looked at or considered as socially disadvantaged. It's not the worst thing in the world, but it just means that you're no longer eligible for the program. And every year we do an assessment, if you will, of continued eligibility. So we want to make sure you have that commercial government balance. I talked about that, which the two stages, marketing ability. You have to know how, you have to market yourself in this program to small. You have to market to agencies. How do I do that? One of the ways that we assist you in marketing that in the 8A program, we send out requirement letters asking, search letters asking for procurement to be set aside for you in this particular program. Do you have the proper NAICS code? Robert talked about NAICS codes in the beginning for respective opportunities. Like I mentioned earlier, the contracts are based upon NAICS codes. And so with those NAICS codes, that kind of tells what it is. And so do you have the proper NAICS codes for these respective contracts? Diminished ability to compete. You want to make sure you can compete. And that's why we have that code, that regulation that we want you to be in business for at least 2 years before you start, this program, because you have to compete out there with other small businesses and your 8As as well. Next slide, Robert. Okay, so SBA no longer accepts the application the old-fashioned way with paper. Everything is done electronically through our portal, which is certified.sba.gov. That is the portal that you would use to submit your documents and apply for the program. Everything is online. Use the online format that we use. And this is the portal that you would go through. And every third Wednesday of the month, we actually have a 8A orientation that you can attend. It starts at 9:30 and goes for about an hour, where we go into everything related to the 8A program.
All right. Rosalind, we're going to move on to the women-owned small business.
So the women-owned small business program, that is a certification program for women. At least 51% ownership by the woman she has to manage the day-to-day operations of the business. And I know a lot of times may have, it could be husband and wife, but that woman has to be running the day-to-day operations of the business and own 51% of the business. This is an opportunity to take advantage of contracts that are set aside for just women-owned companies. It's also in this program, it helps you build capacity and grow. And again, I talked about their contracts that are set aside for WSB as well as economic disadvantaged women-owned small businesses. And that's the component of the $750,000 net worth criteria as well. So here's a diagram of as it relates to eligibility in this program. At least 51% ownership requirement that of a woman. She has to be the highest officer paid in the position. I do know and understand sometimes it could be circumstances that it's not, but you have to prove that to SB why it's like that. Then there's respective NAICS codes with this WSB program. So you'd have to go to our website and see what the respective NAICS codes are related to that. We want the individual that's running the business to have managerial experience. And I talked about she has to definitely manage the day-to-day operations of the business. And there's no minimum time to be in business to participate in this program.
And I'll just touch real quick, the 51% ownership requirement, that's pretty key. So, if you don't have that 51%, if it's 50% ownership between, say, a spouse, right, you wouldn't meet that benchmark for the ownership requirement. And you'll see that with the service disabled veteran-owned small business as well. So you kind of can't split it. So say I'm a service disabled veteran and my spouse is a woman-owned small business owner. If we split it 50-50, then we kind of aren't eligible for either program. So just something to bear in mind as you think about your application process.
So this is the requirements for the economic disadvantage requirements of the Women-Owned Small Business Program. Your personal net worth cannot exceed $750,000, so it has to be $750,000 or less. Your 3-year average income has to be $350,000 or less. And of course, the first thing we look at is on your personal financial statement that your personal assets do not exceed $6 million. So if your personal assets are in excess of $6 million, you're not eligible for this program. So these are just some key eligibility components for the EDWSB that you have to kind of be mindful of. SBA will exclude out your personal, the equity in your primary residence, again, if in fact your personal assets do not exceed $6 million.
Yeah.
And then we exclude out your retirement accounts as well. So there are some exclusions to get you to the number. But the first thing, you can't exceed certain numbers. And then we do the exclusion out when we're doing our analysis. You don't do it yourself first. We do the exclusion out. So we want to make sure you register in sam.gov for all of these respective programs. So there were some changes as of July 15, 2020 with the Women-Owned Small Business Program. And if you go to beta.certified.sba.gov, that's where you actually apply for the program at. I don't know, did you want to say anything else, Robert? I think that's it for me. And that there's the new changes, the as of October the 15th, these are current SBA approved third-party certifiers, El Paso Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. Okay. All right, so those are our third-party certifiers. So here's the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and Women Business Enterprise National Council. So those are the third-party certifiers. So here are the set-asides. So again, we talk about the rule of two. So there are contracts that can be awarded under this program. But again, the contracting officers, looks at the rule or observe the rule of two. So they have to have reasonable expectations that at least 2 women-owned small businesses will submit an offer. And then they make a determination. And of course, all contracts must be awarded at a fair market value. And again, with the difference between the two, WSB and ED, one is economic, of course, but there is the NAICS code,
So if I could just, a couple
which
things.
is the respective industries. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Robert. Were you saying something, Robert? I'm sorry.
Yeah, so just real quick, on the certification piece, just want everybody to be aware, you can either apply for certifications for women-owned small business through SBA directly, or you can take advantage of one of these third-party certifiers. So there's kind of two paths that you can pursue to seek certification. The other piece is related to the economically disadvantaged women-owned small business. You'll see that the economic disadvantage numbers are very similar to what you've got with the 8A business development program. So similar kind of criteria there to keep in mind. So I'm going to run through the service-disabled, veteran-owned small business, and then we'll get to Q&A here. So the service-disabled, veteran-owned small business program, again, qualifying for set-aside opportunities and really intended to help service-disabled, veteran-owned, or SDV OSBs compete in the federal marketplace. 3% set-aside. As I mentioned earlier, 51% ownership requirement. The veteran has to be the highest officer position. You have to be, have designated the proper NAICS codes, managerial experience, manage daily operations. You're seeing some consistencies across all of these certification programs. Currently, for the SDV OSB, you go through the VA to receive your certification. So you can go to the VA's website, look for contracting, and you'll be able to navigate to that program. That is the current status. There may be some changes coming up as SBA, there's potential for SBA to take over that certification program, but just know that that has not happened yet. You're still going to go to the VA for the SDV OSB certification, and the minimum percentage of disability is 30% in order to participate in the SDVO. So with that, I wanted to go ahead and we talked about resources available, but I'd like to hand it back to Frank to get through some Q&A. I know there were a few questions at the get-go.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Bo and Rosalind. So yeah, next we're going to ask some questions that we received from some of the constituents in the 14th district. So this one's going to be from Joanne in Huntley. She says, I'm currently certified as a WMBE, AABE, EDWOSB, and VOSB with the state, and federally a VOSB. And I want to utilize government contracts, but I'm not having any luck in securing any. There are a lot of organizations that reach out to assist, but have significant fees. What avenue would you suggest for me to take to begin getting contracts and funding for any small business?
So Rosalind, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I was going to say, I suggest that Joanne consider working with a PTAC, Procurement Technical Assistance Center, and looking for that assistance, because that's what, that's what it stands, Procurement Technical Assistance Center. So they assist in looking for, they assist you in your search for federal opportunities. That's one resource that I think would be a good resource for her. Is there anything else, Robert, that you could suggest? That's all I can, that would be the key.
Yeah, I think what you might want to look at, Joanne, is number one, engaging with the Procurement Technical Assistance Center. If you Google PTAC Illinois, it should take you to the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunities website, where you can locate the closest PTAC to you. Some of the locations include the Women's Business Development Center, which is a great resource. There's 8 across the state, so I encourage you to take advantage of that resource, no cost to you. They will walk you through kind of step by step. Hey, these are the things you need to think about. You take that, you run with it, come back, you can go back to them. It's kind of like a coaching process where they get you to the point that you want to be at. As far as funding, what I would say is engaging with a small business development center, many of which are co-located with an SBDC, and they are really good at helping businesses secure
funding, so debt funding, other funding. So those are my recommendations there, and you can find those locations at the same spot.
Great. Well, our next question is going to be from a constituent in Port Barrington, and this is regarding certifications. They ask, what's the timeline and the steps involved from initiating the application process to getting approval?
So SBA says it's 90 days from a completed application. So if everything, so generally for the, I'm going to say for the 8A program, the your application is screened, and if there's anything that's been left out and they need additional information, then they send you an email asking you to provide that information. Now that it actually hasn't been looked at in terms of making a decision at that point. But once everything is complete, it's 90 days from a completed application. And that's pretty much on all of our certification programs.
Great. So I'm going to be cognizant of time here, so we'll do one more question.
Okay.
And this comes from a constituent in Naperville. And they say, I'm not good with bureaucracy and red tape. Are there any programs or services that you would recommend that can help me through the process of applying for these certifications?
So we talked about the small business development centers. We talked about our PTACs as well. They can assist you in these certifications. And of course, you can always reach out to us at the SBA at our local district office. I'm kind of solo right now, but we can still assist too as well.
And you can reach us at illinois.d as in Delta, O as in Oscar, at sba.gov. Is the best way to get in touch with us. And again, the PTAC and the SBDC are two tremendous resources I recommend you take advantage of. There's also a Veteran Business Outreach Center located in Wisconsin, but it handles Illinois. So for you veterans out there, another great tool at the Wisconsin Women's Business, www.bic.org is another great resource. So I know we're running up against the time, but hopefully through this programs, you have the problem of getting larger than size standard for federal contracts. That's a good problem to have, and I concentrate on, building your business now and worry about the exceeding size standards later. But again, thanks, Frank, for having us here today. We really appreciate the opportunity.
Yes, thank you, Frank.
No, thank you both so much. Thank you. We really appreciate you guys being here today and all that you guys are doing at the SBA Illinois District Office. So that's going to conclude this. I do want to say thank you to those who are watching. Don't forget, you can reach out to Congresswoman Underwood's office by visiting underwood.house.gov or calling 630-549-2190. Thank you all and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.